The wealthy shoppers mocked Elena as she rang up their designer clothes at the discount store checkout. Everyone thought she was just another minimum wage worker. What they didn't know, she was the heiress who'd walked away from billions. And their cruelty would cost them everything they valued. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The dawn broke cold and gray over Riverside Discount Mall, painting the cracked parking lot in shades of silver and shadow, and Elena Martinez pulled her worn coat tighter as she crossed the empty expanse toward the glass doors that had become as familiar as breathing. 6 months she had walked this path. 6 months of arriving before the sun, of unlocking the employee entrance, of stepping into the fluorescent buzz that replaced the quiet morning she left behind. The mall smelled of floor wax and yesterday's coffee, of discount perfume, and something indefinable that clung to places where hundreds of people passed through daily, seeking bargains they needed and luxuries they couldn't quite afford. Elena moved through the semi-darkness with practiced ease, her fingers finding the light switches without looking, her feet knowing every uneven tile and worn patch of carpet. She made her way to Register 3, her station, and began the small rituals that transformed her from Elena the person into Elena the cashier. She smoothed the wrinkles from her polyester vest, adjusted the name tag that read simply Elena in faded letters, checked that her register drawer was properly secured from the night before. These movements were more than routine. They were meditation. They were armor. Beneath her uniform, hidden against her heart, a small silver locket rested on a delicate chain, the only remnant of a life she had carefully, deliberately left behind. Inside the locket, a photograph barely larger than a thumbnail showed a woman with kind eyes and an uncertain smile, frozen forever in a moment of hope that had long since faded into memory. Elena's fingers brushed the locket through the thin fabric of her vest, a gesture so automatic she barely registered it anymore, and something in her chest loosened just slightly, the way ice cracks before spring. She arranged the discount flyers in their holder, made sure the plastic bags were stocked, ensured the scanner was clean. Everything in its place. Everything simple. Everything hers to control. No board meetings demanding her attention. No photographers lurking at restaurant entrances. No expectations except to scan, to bag, to smile, to make the transaction smooth for whoever stood on the other side of her counter. In this small space, behind this modest register, Elena had found something she never had in the marble towers and leather conference rooms of her former life. She had found peace. The first customers arrived with the sunrise, trickling in as the automatic doors whooshed open to admit the morning cold and the morning people, those who shopped early because their schedules demanded it, or their budgets required them to catch the best deals before they vanished. Elena greeted each one with genuine warmth, her smile never forced, her attention never distracted. An elderly woman fumbled with coins at her register, apologizing in a trembling voice, and Elena waited patiently, helping count out the exact change, slipping an extra coupon for senior discount into the bag with a gentle wink. A young mother with 2 small children clinging to her cart looked exhausted beyond words. Her eyes shadowed with the particular weariness of someone working 2 jobs and still falling behind, and Elena processed her discount formula and diapers, adding a store coupon she kept hidden for moments like this, watching the woman's face transform with relief and gratitude. These moments mattered. These small kindnesses that cost nothing and meant everything. Above the sales floor, behind a plate glass window that overlooked the main concourse, Marcus Rivera stood in his cramped office and watched Elena work. He was 53 but looked older, the weight of 25 years of mall ownership pressing down on shoulders that had once been broader, more confident. His desk was buried under papers, most of them stamped with red ink and words like final notice and foreclosure and 60 days. The mall was dying. He could feel it in the empty storefronts that lined the upper level, in the broken escalator he couldn't afford to fix, in the way foot traffic had dwindled year after year as newer shopping centers opened and online retail swallowed the market. But Elena, Elena was different. In 6 months she had never been late, never complained, never treated a single customer with anything less than dignity. Marcus didn't know much about her. Only that she'd appeared one day with a quiet request for work and references that were oddly minimal, but somehow felt honest. She was overqualified for cashier work, that much was obvious in the way she carried herself. But he had learned not to ask too many questions when good help walked through the door. His assistant, a harried woman named Patricia, entered without knocking, holding another envelope. It was cream-colored, expensive paper, embossed with a logo Marcus had come to dread. Sterling Developments. Patricia set it on his desk without a word and left. Marcus didn't open it. He knew what it said. The vultures were circling, patient and persistent, waiting for him to fail so they could swoop in and tear this place apart. He looked back down at Elena, watched her help an elderly man load his bags, and made a decision he'd been postponing for weeks. He wouldn't sell to them. He'd rather lose it all than hand this community over to developers who saw people as obstacles to profit. The morning rush continued, waves of customers seeking toilet paper and canned goods and school supplies, and Elena moved through her work with quiet efficiency. Her mind, both present and distant, engaged with each person, while some deeper part of her remained untouched, observing, learning, remembering why she had come here in the first place. Then the energy in the store shifted. Elena felt it before she saw them. The way animals sense a coming storm. The automatic doors opened and 3 figures entered, and the very air seemed to recoil. They moved through the discount mall like tourists visiting a zoo, pointing and laughing, their designer clothes and expensive accessories marking them as intruders in this world of necessity and modest means. The woman leading them was tall and sharp, her suit probably costing more than Elena made in 3 months, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum with aggressive precision. Behind her walked a man in an equally expensive suit, carrying a tablet and an expression of perpetual distaste, and a younger woman, barely 20, who held her phone up constantly, filming everything with the casual cruelty of someone who had never known consequence. They shopped loudly, making comments meant to be overheard, criticizing the merchandise, the lighting, the very existence of a place that dared to offer affordable goods. When they approached Elena's register, arms full of designer overstock items, marked down from impossible prices to merely expensive ones, Elena felt her hands begin to tremble. Just slightly. Just enough that she had to press her palms flat against the counter to steady them. The tall woman, Victoria Sterling, though Elena didn't know her name yet, looked at Elena the way someone might look at a stain on expensive upholstery. Something distasteful, something disposable. The items were thrown onto the counter rather than placed, and Elena began scanning them with her usual care, folding each piece of clothing gently despite the rough treatment. "This is what happens when you have no ambition," Victoria announced to her companions, her voice pitched to carry across the store. She gestured at Elena without looking at her directly, as though she were an exhibit. "Working minimum wage at your age. Probably made bad choices. Probably never tried hard enough." The younger woman, Chloe, filmed it all, giggling behind her phone screen. Elena continued scanning, her face calm, her movements steady despite the trembling that had spread from her hands to her arms. She had been mocked before, in her old life, but that mockery had been disguised in boardroom politeness, in passive-aggressive emails and strategic exclusion. This was different. This was meant to wound, meant to humiliate, meant to reduce her to something less than human. When Elena finished scanning and stated the total, Victoria made her repeat it 3 times, claiming she couldn't hear over the terrible music, though the store was nearly silent. Then she threw her credit card at Elena rather than handing it to her, and Elena had to bend down to retrieve it from where it had fallen on the floor. The transaction completed, Elena began carefully folding the items into bags, and Victoria leaned across the counter, her perfume overwhelming, her eyes cold. "You know what your problem is?" Victoria asked, though Elena had said nothing. "You settled. You gave up. You're the cautionary tale mothers tell their daughters about what happens when you don't fight for more." Elena looked up then, meeting Victoria's eyes directly. and said in a voice soft but clear, "I hope you have a beautiful day." The kindness in those words, the genuine wish behind them despite everything, seemed to enrage Victoria more than any retort could have. Her face flushed, her jaw tightened, and with a deliberate motion she reached out and swept a display of travel-sized toiletries off the counter, sending dozens of small bottles clattering across the floor. "Clean that up," Victoria commanded. "We'll wait." Elena looked at the mess, at the other customers watching with expressions ranging from shock to anger to pity, at Marcus starting to move from his office door toward the floor. She nodded once, then knelt down among the scattered bottles, gathering them carefully while Victoria and her companion stood over her, Chloe's phone capturing every moment. As Elena reached for the last bottle, Victoria pulled a dollar bill from her wallet and dropped it onto Elena's head, where it fluttered down to rest on her dark hair. "For your trouble, sweetheart," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Maybe save up for a real job." They left then, their laughter echoing across the store even after the automatic doors closed behind them, and Elena remained kneeling on the cold floor, one hand pressed against the locket beneath her uniform, the other clutching a small bottle of hand sanitizer so tightly the plastic crackled. Marcus reached her first, his face red with fury, pulling her gently to her feet. He was apologizing, banning them from the store, his words tumbling over each other, but Elena barely heard him. "It's all right," she said quietly, brushing off her uniform. "They don't know any better." But Marcus saw what others might have missed. He saw the way her hands shook. He saw the too bright shine in her eyes that meant tears were being held back by sheer will. He insisted she take a break, and Elena didn't argue, walking on unsteady legs toward the break room, a dingy space with flickering lights and an ancient coffee maker and one small mirror hanging crooked on the wall. She sat in the plastic chair she had sat in 100 times before, but this time felt different. This time something had broken. Or perhaps something had finally crystallized into clarity. Elena looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror, at the woman in the polyester vest and faded name tag, at the face that had learned to smile through anything. And suddenly, she was seeing a different reflection, a different time. 6 months ago. That's when it had started. 6 months since she had stood in her mother's hospital room, holding a hand that had grown cold too quickly, listening to machines beep their final rhythms. 6 months since she had discovered the truth about the Castellanos group, about the empire her mother Sophia had built from nothing, and that had become, somewhere along the way, everything that was wrong with unchecked wealth and power. Hotels that had displaced families, real estate developments that had crushed small businesses, tech investments that prioritized profit over people. Always profit over people. Her father had died when Elena was 12, leaving Sophia alone to run the empire, and in her grief and determination, Sophia had lost something essential, something human. The will reading had been 3 days after the funeral, and Elena had sat in the lawyer's office surrounded by board members and advisors who had already begun calculating how to use her, how to manipulate her, how to continue the machine her parents had built. Then the video had played. Her father's face, recorded years before his death, speaking directly to the camera, directly to her. "Be ruthless," he had said. "Compassion is weakness. Take what's yours and never apologize. The world respects only strength, Elena. Only power. Remember that." She had walked out without signing anything, without speaking to anyone, had gone home to the penthouse that felt like a museum and made phone calls that would change everything. Her lawyers, the ethical ones who had tried for years to reform the company from within, had been shocked when she told them what she wanted. Transfer everything to a blind trust. Liquidate holdings built on exploitation. Reform what can be saved. Dissolve what can't. She wanted nothing. She took nothing except the locket her mother had worn, the one containing a photo from before the empire, before the wealth. When Sophia was just a young woman with dreams and kindness still intact. Elena had walked away from $7 billion because she needed to know something essential. She needed to know if she could be different, If she could earn respect through character rather than demand it through wealth. If she could understand the lives her family had destroyed by living among the people they had hurt. So she had come here, to Riverside Discount Mall, to a cashier position that paid $12 an hour, to a small studio apartment she could barely afford, to a life stripped of every advantage except one, the one thing she insisted on keeping, the one thing money couldn't buy or destroy. Her dignity. Marcus knocked and entered before she could respond. His weathered face creased with concern. He sat beside her heavily, and for a long moment they said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "I might lose this place," Marcus said. "The bank. They're foreclosing in 60 days. I wanted you to know. Wanted everyone to know before it becomes public." Elena turned to look at him. This man who had given her a chance when she had nothing to offer but a request and a promise to work hard. She saw the defeat in his eyes, the weight of 25 years of trying to provide for a community that bigger forces wanted to erase. She thought of Victoria Sterling, of the cruelty and contempt, of the way some people saw others as obstacles or servants or jokes. She thought of her mother, dying alone despite having everything money could buy. She thought of the dollar bill dropped on her head like she was a dog performing tricks. Something shifted in Elena then. Something fundamental and irreversible, like a door closing on one life and opening onto another. Her hands stopped trembling. Her breathing steadied. When she looked at Marcus again, there was something different in her eyes. Something he couldn't quite name, but that made him sit up straighter. "Marcus," Elena said softly, "I need to tell you something, but first I need to make a phone call. Is that all right?" He nodded, confused, and left her alone. Elena pulled out her phone, the only expensive item she had kept, and dialed a number she had sworn she would never call again. When the voice answered, crisp and professional, Elena took a deep breath. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "it's Elena Castellanos. I need you to prepare something for me." The evening sky was bruised purple and gray when Elena finally climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her studio apartment, a space so small that standing in the center meant she could touch 2 walls at once, but it was hers, earned with her own labor, paid for with her own wages, and that mattered more than the marble floors and cathedral ceilings she had left behind. She set her worn purse on the narrow counter that served as both kitchen and dining area, kicked off her shoes that had long since lost their cushioning, and opened the laptop that sat on the small table by the window, the only expensive item in the apartment. The only concession she had made to practicality, because some things required connection to the world beyond these 4 walls. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose, typing a name that had burned itself into her memory. Victoria Sterling. The search results loaded and Elena began to read, clicking through article after article, following threads of information that wove together into a pattern she recognized all too well because it was the same pattern her own family had perfected, the same ruthless efficiency that had built empires on the broken backs of communities. Sterling Developments had a history, 23 properties acquired in the last 5 years. Each one a struggling business or residential building in a neighborhood on the edge of gentrification, each one purchased for pennies on the dollar when owners defaulted on loans, each one transformed into luxury condos or boutique retail spaces with rents that displaced everyone who had lived or worked there before. Elena found photos of protests, of families carrying boxes from buildings they could no longer afford, of small business owners standing in front of empty storefronts with signs that read, "Closed after 30 years. Thanks to Sterling." Then she found an article from 5 years ago, accompanied by a photo that made her breath catch. An elderly Asian woman standing in front of a small grocery store, tears streaming down her weathered face, while men in suits and hard hats waited behind her. The caption read, "Local shop owner loses business to development." The woman's name was listed as Mrs. Chen. Elena leaned closer to the screen, studying the face, and recognition hit her like a physical blow. This was the same Mrs. Chen who had come through her register that very morning, the one who fumbled with coins and apologized for taking too long. The one Elena had helped with such care. Victoria Sterling had done this, had taken this woman's livelihood, her husband's legacy, her grandchildren's future. And now Victoria was circling Marcus's mall like a vulture, waiting for something to die so she could feed. Elena's hands trembled as she clicked through more articles, finding patterns of tax fraud barely disguised by shell companies. Illegal eviction notices filed at midnight, bribes paid to city officials to fast-track permits. All of it documented in business journals and local papers. All of it public record. All of it ignored because Victoria Sterling had money and lawyers and the kind of power that made people look away. But Elena knew something Victoria didn't. She knew that some kinds of power were louder than others, and that the loudest power of all was the power of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Elena picked up her phone, the expensive one she had kept because completely disconnecting from her old life would have been irresponsible when she still had obligations to fulfill, still had a trust to oversee, still had people depending on her to ensure the Castellanos' fortune did more good than harm. She dialed a number from memory, and when the cultured voice answered on the second ring, Elena spoke clearly and calmly. "Mr. Harrison," she said, and could hear the surprise in his sharp intake of breath. "It's Elena Castellanos. I need you to prepare something for me." His response was immediate, professional, tinged with concern. "Miss Castellanos, are you certain? You made it very clear you wanted no involvement." Elena watched the lights of the city blink on outside her window, each one representing a life, a story, a person who mattered. "Yes," she said, "I know what I said about staying away. This is different." 3 days passed like a held breath, and in those 3 days, the world discovered the video. Someone had uploaded Chloe's recording to social media with the title, "Entitled Cashier Gets Reality Check." And it had spread like wildfire through the internet's endless appetite for schadenfreude and moral judgment. Elena's face was everywhere, frozen in moments of humiliation, kneeling on the floor gathering scattered bottles while strangers stood over her, and the comments section filled with thousands of voices proclaiming she deserved it, she should have fought back, she should get a better job, she should have more self-respect. But something unexpected happened in the community around Riverside Discount Mall. The regular customers, the ones who knew Elena not as a viral moment, but as a person who had helped them, who had shown them dignity when the world offered none. Chen appeared at the mall on the second day, carrying a container of homemade dumplings, insisting Elena eat, patting her hand with rough fingers that had known hard work and harder losses. The young mother Elena had helped, whose name was Sarah, started a petition called Support Elena, going door to door in the neighborhood, collecting signatures from people who wanted to tell a different story than the one the internet had decided was true. They didn't know why they felt so compelled to defend this cashier they barely knew. They only knew that in a world that felt increasingly cold and transactional, Elena had been warm and human, and that mattered, that meant something. That deserved to be protected. Marcus received the foreclosure notice on the 3rd day, delivered by a courier who wouldn't meet his eyes. 30 days, the letter said in bold print at the top. 30 days to vacate. 30 days to dismantle 25 years of work, of community, of purpose. He called a staff meeting that afternoon, gathering the 15 employees in the small break room where the coffee maker still sputtered and hissed, where the motivational poster on the wall had faded to pale colors and vaguer promises. Marcus tried to smile, tried to sound hopeful, tried to tell them he was exploring options and not to worry. But his voice cracked halfway through, and he had to stop, had to press his palm against his eyes, had to let them see his defeat, because hiding it would have been a greater cruelty. Elena stood in the back, watching faces crumble with the news. Single mothers who needed this job to feed their children, retirees who worked to supplement Social Security that didn't stretch far enough. Students paying for college one minimum wage, paycheck at a time. She saw their fear, their desperation, their resignation to a system that ground people down and called it business. and she felt something twist inside her, that old familiar conflict between the vow she had made to never again use wealth as a weapon and the reality that sometimes the only way to fight power was with power. She had sworn to live differently, to earn her place through character rather than capital, to never again be the person who decided fates from behind a desk in a tower. But what good were principles if they meant standing by while good people suffered, while communities died, while someone like Victoria Sterling crushed everything beautiful and small beneath designer heels and called it progress? That evening, Elena stayed late at the mall, walking through the empty corridors after closing, and she made her decision. The next morning, Victoria Sterling returned. She arrived with Reginald and a professional camera crew, all lights and equipment, and the self-important bustle of people who believed they were documenting something significant. Victoria wore a red suit, the color of victory or blood depending on perspective, and she moved through the mall like a conqueror surveying newly claimed territory, pointing at spaces and making pronouncements about what would be demolished and what might be salvaged. She insisted on shopping, on creating content, and she specifically requested Register 3, Elena's register. Marcus tried to intervene, positioning himself between Victoria and the checkout area. But Victoria's lawyer appeared with papers threatening legal action for harassment and discrimination, and Marcus backed down because he couldn't afford another lawsuit. Couldn't afford anything anymore except perhaps his dignity, and even that was being tested. Elena watched them approach. Camera lights bright and harsh, and she felt surprisingly calm. She had made her choice. Now she would see it through. Victoria piled items on the counter with exaggerated carelessness, playing to the camera, delivering lines about community improvement and economic development, while Chloe filmed and Reginald took notes, and a small crowd began to gather, drawn by the spectacle. Then Victoria made her announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, projecting her voice across the mall with practiced ease, "I'm pleased to announce that Sterling Developments has acquired this property. We'll be transforming this outdated space into luxury condominiums and upscale retail. Everyone currently employed here will, of course, need to seek opportunities elsewhere. Perhaps our friend the cashier can find work at my new luxury spa. We're always looking for people to fold towels." The crowd murmured, some uncomfortable, some curious, all watching. The cameras captured everything. Elena took a breath and spoke, her voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence. "Ma'am," she said, "I wonder if you'd allow me to say something." Victoria's smile widened, delighted. "Oh, this was perfect content." "Of course," she said. "Please, share your thoughts. The floor is yours." Elena stepped out from behind the register and the crowd pressed closer. Phones raised, cameras focused. She didn't look at Victoria yet. She looked at the people, at Mrs. Chen standing near the front with tears already forming, at Sarah holding her petition with both hands, at Marcus slumped against a support column. She looked at all the faces of people who had been invisible their whole lives, and she thought of her mother, of Sofia Castellanos, who had built an empire and lost her soul. "My mother," Elena began, and her voice was steady though her hands still trembled, "grew up with nothing. She worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, built an empire from determination and sacrifice. She became one of the wealthiest women in the world. And when she died 6 months ago, I held her hand in a hospital room that cost more per day than most people earn in a month. And she was completely alone, not because she had no family. Because somewhere along the way, she forgot that money is just paper if it costs you your humanity. She died with billions in the bank and no one who truly loved her, no one who knew her, no one who would miss the person she was rather than the wealth she represented. I was there. I watched her slip away. I saw what happens when you build your life on other people's suffering and call it success." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even Victoria's smile had faltered. Elena continued, "You see people as obstacles or servants. Every person you dismiss, every family you displace, every life you disrupt for profit, You tell yourself it's just business, just progress, just the way things work. But every person you've stepped on has a story as complex and meaningful as yours. That woman, Elena pointed to Mrs. Chen, that woman you evicted 5 years ago. She's here. Mrs. Chen, would you stand? Mrs. Chen stood on shaking legs, and Elena gestured for her to come forward. Tell them, Elena said gently. Tell them what Sterling Developments took from you. Mrs. Chen's English was broken, but her pain was universal. She spoke of the grocery store her husband had run for 30 years, of the apartment above it where they'd raised their children, of the community that had depended on them. She spoke of Sterling Developments buying the building, tripling the rent overnight, filing eviction papers when they couldn't pay. She spoke of her husband's heart attack 3 months later, of stress and shame and a broken man who had lost his purpose. She spoke of grandchildren who couldn't afford college now, of a life dismantled by people who never knew her name. Victoria's face had gone pale, but she recovered quickly, stepping forward with her lawyer's smooth arguments. This is very unfortunate, she said, but it was legal. Business requires difficult decisions. We can't be held hostage by sentiment. We have property rights. Elena's phone rang then, perfectly timed, and she answered it. Yes, Mr. Harrison, she said clearly. They're ready? Good. She ended the call and looked directly at Victoria Sterling for the first time. I need to tell you something, Miss Sterling. My name is Elena Castellanos. The effect was immediate and profound. Victoria's face drained of all color. Reginald dropped his tablet, and it clattered against the floor. In the crowd, people who understood the business world gasped, whispered, pulled out phones to search the name. Elena Castellanos, heir to the Castellanos Group, $7 billion. Hotels, real estate, tech investments. One of the 50 wealthiest families in the country. And she'd been working as a cashier. Elena didn't wait for Victoria to recover. 6 months ago, she said, I walked away from my family's empire because I realized we'd become exactly what you are. People who forgot that wealth is meaningless if you build it on others' suffering. I came here to learn what it meant to live without that power. To earn respect through character rather than demand it through money. And you know what I discovered? I discovered that cruelty feels exactly the same whether you're wealthy or poor. Whether you're the one wielding power or the one crushed beneath it. A man entered the mall then, elderly and distinguished in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Harrison, Elena's lawyer. He approached with documents that rustled like dry leaves, official papers covered in legal text and notary seals. Miss Castellanos has been investigating Sterling Developments for 3 days, Mr. Harrison said, his voice professionally neutral. We've found significant evidence of tax fraud, illegal evictions, bribery of city officials, and multiple building code violations deliberately concealed. These documents detail everything. Elena looked at Victoria, who stood frozen, trapped between the cameras, still recording, and the crowd still watching, and the legal consequences now materializing before her. I'm offering you a choice, Elena said. You can face these legal consequences. Investigations, trials, possible prison time. Or you can make this right. Sell this property to me at fair market value. Publicly apologize to everyone you've hurt. Use your skills and knowledge to build something that serves the community rather than destroys it. I'm giving you the chance no one gave my mother, the chance to choose differently before it's too late. Victoria's shock transformed into rage. She stepped forward, shaking. You're just like me, she hissed. You're using your power to destroy me. This is exactly what you claim to hate. Elena shook her head slowly. No, she said. I'm giving you a choice. My mother never got one. The world around her only rewarded ruthlessness, so she became ruthless. I'm offering you redemption. But if you refuse, if you choose to continue hurting people, then yes, I'll use every resource I have to stop you. Not for revenge, for protection, for justice, For all the Mrs. Chens whose stories never get told. Victoria stared at her for a long moment, and something flickered across her face. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. Then her pride reasserted itself, and she drew herself up tall. "I'll bury you in court," she said. "I'll fight this. I'll win." She turned to leave, gesturing sharply for Reginald and the camera crew to follow. But Chloe, Victoria's daughter, remained standing in place. Her phone hung loose in her hand, no longer recording. She looked at Elena with eyes that had suddenly seen something they'd been blind to before. And her voice, when she spoke, was small and trembling and impossibly young. "I'm sorry," Chloe whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't think. I'm sorry." Elena looked at this girl who had filmed her humiliation, who had laughed while she knelt on the floor, and saw not an enemy but another person shaped by wealth and isolation into something cruel. She stepped forward and gently, briefly, touched Chloe's shoulder. "You can be different," Elena said. "You can choose differently. It's not too late for you." Chloe burst into tears then, and as Victoria stormed out of the mall into the waiting confrontation with reality and consequence, her daughter stayed behind in the crowd of ordinary people who had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that felt like the world shifting on its axis, like justice arriving not with thunder, but with the quiet determination of someone who had learned that the true measure of power was not how much you could take, but how much you could give away and still stand tall. 2 weeks crawled by like wounded animals, and the world discovered Elena Castellanos in a way that twisted truth into spectacle and compassion into controversy. Victoria Sterling, cornered and desperate, had hired the best crisis management firm money could buy, and they had spun a narrative that spread through news outlets and social media like poison through water. "Billionaire heiress pretends to be poor," the headline screamed. "Elitist playing dress-up. Trust fund baby slumming for social media clout." The stories painted Elena as a wealthy dilettante who had invaded working-class spaces as some kind of social experiment, who had taken a job from someone who truly needed it, who had deceived honest people for her own entertainment or enlightenment. The think pieces multiplied like bacteria, each one more outraged than the last. Each one claiming to speak for the poor and working class, while ignoring the actual voices of the people who knew Elena, who had worked beside her, who had been helped by her. But something remarkable happened in the community around Riverside Discount Mall. The people who actually knew Elena, who had experienced her kindness firsthand, refused to accept the narrative being forced upon them. They organized rallies in the mall parking lot, small gatherings at first but growing larger each day, where they stood with handmade signs and shared their stories. Mrs. Chen spoke through a translator about how Elena had helped her count change with patience and dignity, never once making her feel small or stupid or less than human. Sarah, the young mother, brought her children and told anyone who would listen about the coupons Elena had slipped into her bags. The gentle encouragement, the way Elena had remembered her kids' names and asked about them. A retired veteran named Thomas described how Elena had stayed late one evening to help him fill out paperwork for benefits he didn't know he qualified for, how she had treated him like he mattered when the world had spent decades telling him he didn't. Mrs. Chen's testimony about Sterling developments gained traction too, spreading through community networks and local news channels that were hungry for a different angle on the story. People began digging into Victoria Sterling's history, finding pattern after pattern of exploitation and cruelty, and the narrative started to shift, slowly at first, but with gathering momentum. Marcus appeared at Elena's modest apartment on the 3rd day after the revelation, knocking softly and waiting with the patient awkwardness of someone who no longer knew quite how to relate to a person they thought they understood. Elena opened the door in sweatpants and an old shirt, her hair pulled back, no makeup, looking exactly like the cashier he had known, and Marcus felt something in his chest loosen because she was still her, still the same person who had shown up on time every day and treated every customer with genuine care. He accepted her offer of tea and they sat at her small table by the window. And Marcus finally asked the question that had been burning in him. Why did you really come here, Elena? And Elena looked at this man who had given her a chance when she needed it most, who had created a space where community still mattered. And she told him the truth. Because I needed to remember what matters, she said, her voice soft but steady. My mother died surrounded by luxury and utterly alone. She had everything money could buy, and nothing that made life worth living. No real friends, no genuine connection. Just people who wanted things from her, who saw her as a source of wealth or power or access. I held her hand as she died, and I realized I was terrified of becoming her. I needed to know if I could be different, if I could earn something that wasn't bought. If I could matter to people not because of my bank account but because of who I was. Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his weathered one. You earned something money can't buy, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. You earned our trust, our respect, our affection. That's why they're fighting for you out there. Not because you're wealthy, because you're good. The legal machinery ground forward with inexorable precision. Mr. Harrison presented the evidence to federal authorities, and Sterling Developments found itself under investigation for tax fraud, illegal evictions, bribery, and a dozen other charges that had been hidden behind shell companies and expensive lawyers for too long. Victoria's assets were frozen pending trial, her projects halted, her reputation in ruins. The media that had built her up as a savvy businesswoman now tore her down with equal enthusiasm because the narrative had shifted and shame generated clicks just as effectively as admiration. Elena negotiated with the bank that held the mortgage on Riverside Discount Mall, and the transaction was conducted through Mr. Harrison with meticulous attention to fairness and transparency. She purchased the property for 3 times its appraised value, ensuring that Marcus's debts were completely cleared with enough money left over for him to retire comfortably if he chose, though Elena hoped he would choose differently. She gathered the staff in the mall's food court on a Tuesday morning, all 15 employees plus Marcus. And she presented her vision not as a decree from on high, but as an invitation to build something together. This won't be a discount mall anymore, she said. But it won't be a luxury development either. It will be something new, something that serves everyone. The ground floor would remain affordable retail for working families. The stores carefully curated to provide quality goods at fair prices. The second floor would become small business incubators, offering affordable commercial space and free business mentoring for entrepreneurs who had ideas but no capital, dreams but no access. The third floor would house a community center with free educational programs, job training, after-school care for children, health clinics offering sliding scale services. All profits would be reinvested in the community, creating a sustainable model that could be replicated elsewhere. Marcus, Elena said, looking at the man who had become more than an employer, who had become something like family. I need you to manage this. I have resources. You have wisdom. You know this community. You've protected it for 25 years. Help me build something that honors that. Every current employee would keep their job with significant raises and full benefits. Single parents would receive childcare support. Retirees would get adjusted schedules that accommodated their needs. New positions would be created and filled from within the community first. This wasn't charity. This was justice. 3 months passed like the turning of seasons, and the mall transformed. Construction happened in carefully planned phases, so businesses could continue operating, so the community's needs were met even during the rebuilding. The sounds of hammers and saws became the soundtrack of possibility. Each wall that came down revealing new potential. Each space reimagined as something that served, rather than extracted. Chloe Sterling returned on a Tuesday afternoon, entering through the main doors without cameras or entourage or the armor of wealth. She wore jeans and a simple shirt, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying that had become habitual over the past months, watching her mother's downfall, watching the carefully constructed world of privilege and power collapse under the weight of its own corruption. She found Elena in what would become the community center, reviewing floor plans with contractors. and she waited until Elena was alone before approaching. "I want to help," Chloe said, her voice small and uncertain. "I know I don't deserve to be here. I know what I did was cruel and wrong. But I want to be different. I want to learn how." Elena looked at this young woman who had filmed her humiliation, who had laughed at her pain. And she saw not an enemy but a victim of a different kind of poverty, the poverty of soul that came from being raised in isolation and entitlement. She invited Chloe to sit, and she listened, really listened. As Chloe spoke about a mother who had never been present, who had taught love through expensive gifts and approval through achievement, who had modeled cruelty as strength and compassion as weakness, Elena shared her own story in return, the parts she usually kept hidden, the loneliness of wealth, the crushing weight of expectations, the moment she had realized she would rather have nothing than continue living a lie. They talked for 3 hours that first day, and when Chloe left, she was carrying a volunteer application and the first genuine hope she had felt in years. Chloe began teaching social media skills to small business owners in the incubator spaces, helping them build online presence and reach customers. And slowly she discovered that using her privileged knowledge to empower others felt infinitely better than using it to mock and diminish. Victoria Sterling accepted a plea deal that her lawyers assured her was the best outcome possible, given the mountain of evidence against her: community service, restitution to victims, permanent ban from real estate development. The judge had been harsh, disgusted by the pattern of exploitation, and Victoria had stood in the courtroom feeling something she had never allowed herself to feel before: shame. Real, burning, undeniable shame. Her community service assignment placed her at a non-profit organization that helped families facing eviction. The same families she had once displaced without thought or remorse, and the work was painful in ways she couldn't have imagined. Listening to their stories, seeing their faces, understanding, finally, that every decision she had made in pursuit of profit had shattered real lives, destroyed real dreams, caused real suffering. But slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, something began to shift inside her. The work wore away at her armor, revealed the person she had been before ambition had consumed everything else, and she started to remember what it felt like to help rather than hurt. Elena saw Victoria at a community event 6 months after the plea deal, a scholarship fair where local students could learn about educational opportunities and financial aid. Victoria was sitting at a table with Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, helping fill out college applications, her expensive suit replaced by simple business casual, her sharp edges softened by months of humbling labor. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment time seemed to pause. Victoria nodded, not quite an apology but an acknowledgement, a recognition of the journey from who she had been to who she was becoming. Elena nodded back, understanding that redemption was not a moment but a process. Not a destination but a choice made daily. The grand opening of the transformed Riverside Community Mall happened on a bright Saturday in spring, when the world felt full of possibility and second chances. Media vans lined the parking lot, reporters eager to document this feel-good story that had captured imaginations. But Elena insisted on working one shift at a register in the community center cafe, a space that offered pay-what-you-can pricing, so no one would be turned away for lack of funds. The same customers she had served 9 months ago came through, and they greeted her with hugs and tears and stories of transformation. Sarah, the young mother, now managed one of the small business incubator spaces, helping other struggling entrepreneurs the way Elena had helped her. Her children were thriving in the after-school program, receiving tutoring and enrichment they never could have afforded before. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing," Sarah told Elena, gripping her hands tight. "Now I can do the same for others. You showed me that poverty doesn't define worth, that everyone deserves dignity and opportunity." Mrs. Chen reopened her grocery store in a corner space on the ground floor, rent-controlled with a 10-year lease that gave her security she thought she'd never have again. Her grandchildren attended the free tutoring programs upstairs, and her oldest had been accepted to college with a full scholarship. She pressed a container of dumplings into Elena's hands, the same dumplings she had brought months ago, and tears of joy streamed down her weathered face as she spoke in halting English about second chances, and answered prayers, and the kindness of one person changing everything. Marcus stood in the center of the transformed mall. Color returned to his cheeks, hope restored to his eyes, and he was hiring, expanding, dreaming again. "You didn't just save a mall," he told Elena. "You saved a community. You saved me. You reminded us all that business can have a soul, that profit and compassion aren't enemies, that there's another way to build wealth that doesn't require crushing everything beautiful and small." After the celebration quieted and the crowds dispersed and the media packed up their equipment, Elena returned to the break room, renovated now with better lighting and comfortable furniture, but intentionally kept modest as a reminder of where this journey had begun. She sat in the same spot where she had once questioned everything, where she had made the phone call that changed the trajectory of so many lives, and she pulled the silver locket from beneath her shirt. She opened it carefully, looking at her mother's photograph, at that uncertain smile captured decades ago. "I found a different way, Mom," Elena whispered to the image. "I took the fortune you built and I used it to heal instead of hurt. I know you forgot yourself somewhere along the journey. I know the world taught you that compassion was weakness, but I'm teaching a different lesson now. I hope wherever you are, you understand. I hope you're proud." The narrator's voice shifted then, became something different, speaking not through Elena but directly to those witnessing this story, breaking through the fourth wall between narrative and audience. Elena walked away from billions to find her humanity, the voice said. What she discovered was that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the lives you touch, the communities you build, the courage to choose compassion over comfort. She learned that money itself is neutral, neither good nor evil, but what we do with it defines us. She learned that redemption is always possible, that change can happen, that one person choosing differently can create ripples that transform everything around them. We may not all have billions to give away, but we all have something. We all have moments where we can choose kindness over cruelty, connection over judgment, humanity over hierarchy. The next time you encounter someone you might dismiss, a cashier, a janitor, a server, a stranger struggling, remember Elena. Remember that everyone's story is deeper than you know, that the person serving your coffee or bagging your groceries might be fighting battles you can't see, carrying dreams you can't imagine, possessing dignity that deserves your respect regardless of their circumstances. Your small act of recognition, your moment of genuine kindness, might be the catalyst that changes everything. Elena created the Sofia Castellanos Community Restoration Fund in her mother's name, a foundation dedicated to finding dying communities and empowering them to rebuild themselves with resources and respect rather than charity and condescension. She would not return to the boardrooms and galas of her former life, but she would use the tools wealth provided to wage war against the systems that concentrated power and crushed hope. She worked the cafe register one final time, and a man approached, wealthy by the look of his clothes but uncertain in his bearing. Elena recognized something in his eyes, a struggle she understood intimately. "How can I help you today?" she asked, her smile genuine and warm. The man hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. "I read about this place," he said. "About you. I inherited my father's company. It's built on practices I can't defend anymore. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make it right. Can we talk?" Elena invited him to sit, and as they talked, the space around them filled with the sounds of community, people from different walks of life connecting, building, growing together. The narrator's voice returned one final time, with a truth that felt both timeless and urgent. "Change doesn't happen in grand gestures alone," it said, "but in small moments of courage, repeated daily." Elena chose to walk away from everything to find herself. But her greater choice was to come back, to engage, to use her privilege as a tool for justice rather than a shield from consequence. If this story moved you, share it. Let it remind us all that we are more than our circumstances, more than our bank accounts, more than the labels the world places upon us. We are the choices we make when no one is watching. We are the kindness we extend when it costs us something. We are the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Because sometimes, the person everyone laughs at is the one who will teach us what it truly means to be rich, and the wealth that matters most can never be counted. Only felt in the connections we forge, and the lives we touch, and the communities we build together. One small act of dignity at a time.